So what I'm going to do today is, for the first hour-ish, I'm going to talk to you about Taoism a little more, reiterate some stuff, and talk to you about the I Ching, which is the Taoist book of changes. And I think if we have time, I think we will have time, we will maybe do a little, we can even get a volunteer and do a consultation in class and see how it goes. And then I'm going to 10-ish, 10, 15-ish, we'll take a break, and our guest speaker, Julie Ryan, will be here, hopefully. And she will do a demonstration of traditional Chinese medicine and talk about acupuncture and herbology. And she's a really interesting speaker and somebody I've known for a long time and is in practice here in Camarillo. And so if you get inspired by listening or seeing her, you can, you're going and experiencing this for yourself is available to you, and she gives discounts for students and all that kind of stuff. So we'll talk about her a little bit later. What I'm going to do first is talk a little bit about Taoism and I Ching, and this comes from a workshop that I did that I know some of you guys came to back in September, interestingly enough on September 11th, which was, we talked about shifts in the chi of not just individuals, but also of nations and whole groups of people, which of course in September 11th, 2001, we had made such a shift in this country. And so anyway, I thought I would give you this lecture. It has a little more stuff than the stuff I usually talk about in class, and some of the stuff I think is kind of interesting. So I'm gonna go over that, and then it'll also reiterate some of the stuff from last week as well. Now, I talked to you about how I learned Taoism, learned about at least philosophical religious Taoism. So a little bit of personal history. This is my friend, as he would call himself, the Taoist Lu Ming. And he's my friend for a number of years. I work with him on a daily basis. And he was a Westerner who was a Tibetan Buddhist monk for about 25 years, 20 years, and then went off to study with a Taoist teacher in Taiwan. And I told you the story about him meditating in the cave full of black snakes and poisonous snakes and all that stuff. And he had a very traditional Taoist training in a very village tradition. Okay, the village tradition, and there's really you can kind of think lots of traditions in Taoism, but one way to think about it, sort of in simplified ways, to think about sort of court traditions and think about village traditions. And if you have to make the distinction, and again, it's a little artificial, the court traditions are really about religious Taoism, praying to, the eight immortals and doing certain rituals, everything to rectify the chi of the country and keep everything running correctly. As where village Taoism really has as its base this idea of shamanism that I talked to you about, this Tao of Shi, this shamanism, where you're really making contracts and deals with supernatural forces to keep the village from being destroyed or collapsed or going into a famine, all that kind of thing. Because the village level, that kind of stuff was really important. And so Ming's, and by the way, Lu Ming, this is written out in the Chinese fashion, that Ming is the first name and Lu is the family name. So he was actually adopted into his teacher's family. And this is something you'll find in, if you study a Chinese art really assiduously for many, many years, or you do an intensive training in something, a lot of times, the sort of tradition is to keep the knowledge, the skills in the family. And so when they teach it to an outsider, eventually, if you get to a high enough level, you will be adopted into the family. And this is what happened with Lu Ming. He was adopted into the family, and he took on the last name of Lu. This also, you can see this in other things. My mother-in-law, for instance, is a Tai Chi teacher, and she has been teaching and studying with her teacher for so long that she also underwent this formal adoption ceremony to take on his name and to be part of the family. right? So this is the way they keep the family lineage going, but you allow outsiders to come in and sort of, you know, not let it die off, right? And so Ming was adopted in this family of his teacher, and then after his training, came back to the United States to teach Taoism, and he did this in a number of ways. He really was a master, at least of a few of the 5 excellences, right? 5 excellences are what? Martial arts, calligraphy, poetry, painting. Now I'm getting mixed up. Painting, medicine, cooking, painting, calligraphy, martial arts, and missing one more. Yeah. You guys get the idea. It's terrible. I should have these down for the lecture. The 5 branches, so to speak. Okay. I think actually it's poetry would be the 5th one, right? Poetry, calligraphy, painting, because painting is done, calligraphy, cooking, medicine, martial arts. Okay. So he was an expert certainly an expert at the cooking part. He'd been a cook before he embarked on a spiritual life, and he brought the idea. He'd been a cook at a Zen monastery, which you guys remember was a really high position. He was an excellent cook, and he applied the Taoist principles that we've talked about so far to his cooking. And he was, you know, if he cooked dinner for you, it was the highest honor that you possibly could have. And he cooked absolutely delicious food. So that was one of his things that he did. He also wrote a number of books, and I didn't bring his book with me, but he has 2 that were just published posthumously, another one that's coming out, and then he wrote another one earlier on. And he actually did a translation of the I Ching, a newer translation of the I Ching, which maybe I'll talk a little bit about. Unfortunately, he died last year before last, unexpectedly. That was very sad. He still has students up in Berkeley, Oakland area, and he had a whole group that he was running and teaching people up there, and I don't know what's going to happen to them now. I want to reiterate, I was never his student officially. I was his friend, and he always preferred that relationship of friends over to the guru, Chela, disciple relationship, the teacher-disciple relationship. He didn't like that. Made him very uncomfortable. And he referred to himself as, you know, Lao Ge, right, the older brother, okay, rather than being the ultimate authority, the guru, disciple. And because of this, you know, our relationship was really one of friends, and maybe not quite equal knowledge of friends, because he was much more knowledgeable than me, but I feel like I learned a lot from him. I spent a lot of time with him. And he would teach me stuff just sort of like, you know, kind of on the sly without really teaching me stuff. He'd start telling me stories, and he would tell me about things. And I think over the years I picked up a tremendous amount from him. I look back on our relationship and I realized how much I learned from him. It was really quite a lot. And it's one of the motivating forces of why I teach this class, partly to keep the stuff that he taught me alive a little bit, and to, you know, give you things that you're not going to otherwise hear about Taoism, because you won't hear much about Taoism coming out of these village traditions, because it's very rare to find an academic or somebody who formally studies Taoism who comes out of the village tradition. There is one scholar out there who had a very similar background to Ming's, and they met. I actually was there when they met. It was very interesting that they were comparing stuff, and they were basically in different villages, like on one side of the mountain or the other side of the mountain. It's very interesting. But most of the academic scholars really come out of the sort of more court tradition, and so you won't get this kind of perspective. So things like I taught you last week about the Tao of Tao, the Tao of Day, the Tao of Shi, that is really something that is that you won't really hear much about probably from other teachers or other sources of Taoism. So that directly relates to this sort of tradition that he came out of, and something I feel like that is, if I'm going to talk to you about Taoism, I'm going to pass it on to you, okay? Because it's kind of I don't want to say secret, it's an open secret. It's not a secret, but it's something that's not really usually talked about. Okay? So whatever I'm telling you, you know, if I make a mistake, that comes from me. If whatever I'm telling you is profound, it has some value, it comes from me. Okay? Now we talked already about Tao, translating this, I'm not going to go over that again. But I want to point out that something, the term Taoist is not something that Taoists came up with. This term was applied by Confucianists, the people who followed the Tao. Okay, so the Confucianists are the ones who sort of made this up, right? And made this up. Oh yeah, those Taoists over there. You know. There are no real sort of masters in Taoism. Again, this guru-disciple relationship is a little bit frowned upon, at least in the shamanic Taoism. There are what we call Daoshi. These are sort of the masters of the public religious tradition of ritual, the people who would be, you know, employed by the court or something, and they had this sort of title. But most people, you know, who did this, they were just people who just did practice Taoism or followed the Tao. And in the traditional sort of forms of Taoism, you know, titles and things were much less important. Okay, so we're going to really focus on this part because this is really this is the personal practice of Taoism versus the sort of, you know, ritual, court, public, if we could say professional practice of Taoism. So if I'm hired by the court to be a Taoist guy, you know, and you know, I go out and I throw the I Ching and I come out and I, in a certain kind of voice, read the proclamation to the king, to the emperor, you know, in a court way, you know, and I do some kind of ritual where I walk around and rectify the cheat of the court. That's the Daoshi, that's the master, that's the professional guy. But that's only one little part of Taoism. And this really, you know, more personal practice, the more village practice, the more personal practice, this is where we really, as I think, as Americans, can connect to Taoism in a more intimate, immediate way. And the easiest maybe way to do that is through the practice of the I Ching. Okay, the I Ching. And you'll notice I Ching, spelled I Ching here, and also spelled I Ching. Okay, there's lots of different ways to spell this, transliterate it, you'll see them, but you know what I'm talking about when I talk about it, okay? Okay, so we're not going to talk about religious Taoism stuff because that's, we talked about this already, the different schools and the shamanic roots we talked about, the Confucian stuff we talked about, this secret thing here, the Taoist fruit method, we talked about this. And I want to get back to preparing for the consultation a little bit later. The philosophical roots of Taoism, we went over this last time, but again, I want to reiterate this because this is where the origins of the I Ching come from, right? That we start in this sort of Wu Wei, you know, Wu Qi, emptiness, and from that we start having dualities, pure dualities, you know, light and dark, male and female, good and evil, whatever you want to put in there. And then, and then these then further manifest in the world. They further subdivide, and they form this Tai Chi symbol, which means grand ultimate. And in this, you see the mixture of yin and yang, and how yang starts becoming predominant, then includes a little bit of yin, and eventually turns into yin, and yin eventually, even as it becomes predominant, includes a little bit of yang, but eventually turns back into yang. And so with this symbol should be seen as a dynamic symbol, that yin and yang are constantly changing, constantly moving, okay? Constantly changing, constantly moving, one into the other, constantly flowing with each other. It's a symbol, big symbol. Ming always got upset when you would see people plastering this, like, you know, you go to a martial arts studio, they'd have this on the floor, and he'd be really pissed off. He goes, that's like a sacred symbol to us. How can people put it on the floor? Like, you know, it's so rude. And I would point out to him, they put it on the floor because they're actually walking this pattern, and so they use it as a pattern on the floor to walk this, because that's what Taoists would do, some kinds of Taoists would do as a meditation practice, and then later on, martial artists who were inspired by Taoism would actually walk this symbol on the, you know, around doing their martial arts practice. They'd walk the symbol around, right? And they'd go here, and walk the symbol. And so, but he was still pissed off. He didn't like to see this sort of flippantly adopted by pop culture. He found that really quite insulting. And again, you saw this diagram, the idea that we can break this yin and yang down into, like, you know, details. And this is a This is looking at time, time throughout the day, again, as an example of the sort of yin shifting into yang and yang shifting into yin that you have here. You can look at this that way. You also, back in very traditional Chinese medicine, you'd also use these sort of time cycles at time when kind of treatment you were doing. That it's certain, if you were going to, work on somebody who had some yang deficiency, then you might, want to wait till, the certain time of the day when you would needle them, and you'd needle certain points, according to what time the person was coming in to be treated. You don't see much of that nowadays, but back in the day, that was also part of the medicines, to be looking at those kind of things. And this is the thing I wanted to show you the most today, is that this is sort of describes, sort of how reality comes into existence. That you have all this yin and yang stuff, and if you want to break this down and understand it, you can start breaking it down again into yin and yang, and then again into, looking at these, mixture of yin and yang here with 2 lines, and then you have another line, and you have another mixture, which is 8, right? And when we talked about this, the Bagua, the 8 trigrams. And again, these break down into, these symbols: earth, mountain, water, wind, thunder, fire, lake, heaven, right? And heaven and earth are the 2 extremes of yin and yang, okay? And then you've got these other mixtures in between. And again, reality, our reality is thought to be a mixture of all these things. This is not too far different, in my opinion. I'm not sure Ming would like this idea, but it's not too far different than what I talked about in Buddhism about dependent arising. Right, the idea that everything comes from something else, right? So you have some things starting out here, the Big Bang, and then everything sort of derives from that. You get these mixtures of reality that derive from that, of all these things happening and then causing other things. It's not too different, in my mind at least, than the idea here. Okay? You've got some big cause here, and you've got these main dualities, and they start mixing together, and you get down to where you describe things with these 8 patterns. But then, if you really want to describe the whole world and everything in it, or be able to talk about it, then you need more than 8. You saw this before. You need to, you combine the 8 with the 8, and you make patterns of hexagrams. And this forms the basis of the I Ching. Okay. Yes?
I think a slide or 2 ago you showed one where it got the 4 like on different like
This
that
one?
is,
This one?
yeah.
Yeah, there's different patterns.
Is that what's on the South Korean flag?
Is it what?
The South Korean flag.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, because this would also have pervaded, the idea so here would have pervaded Korea, Asian countries. I don't know for sure, but yeah, I think that would make sense. I don't know which arrangement it is. Arrangement doesn't really matter that much. Let's get the idea here.
I think it's like this.
So you put the trigrams together, 8 trigrams, and you can see this diagram here, the 8 on the side, 8 on the top, and then you're able to make hexagrams, 6-line patterns. And this is thought to make a reasonable representation of everything in the universe. And I'm looking at this and I'm seeing, is there an issue here? No, this is it. Okay, so this is thought to be a good representation of the universe. Now you'll notice here it's not like logically laid out, like 1 through 8, 1 through 8 here. Like you'll notice here 58 is here in the corner and 64 is up here. So don't worry about the arrangements of it. Just the idea that you are doing these, and then you come out with these patterns. And these patterns, these 8 patterns, are thought to be able to have enough resolution to talk about or comment on most of what goes on in at least in our human lives. You could imagine that you could take these, these 64, and you could have 64 on one side and 64 on the other side, and you could come out with whatever 64 by 64 is, and have something even more complicated. And, probably people thought about that, but then they also probably thought that's too complicated. It's not going to be useful for us anymore, right? Because you could just go on, ad infinitum, making these things more complicated. But this one was thought to be sort of the one that would be useful for us to help inform our lives about things. Now, another idea that comes from the I Ching, and again, this doesn't come directly out of Taoism, but would be sort of a more modern interpretation of this, is this idea of the I Ching representing sort of archetypal or imaginal space. And I think I talked to you guys about this before, but this is something you see in many different cultures around the world, where you have sort of our consensus reality here, and you have some kind of unknowable reality. It could be moksha in Hinduism, it could be nirvana in Buddhism, it could be heaven in Islam or Christianity. But you have these two extremes, the everyday world and this unknowable world. And the archetypal or imaginal world is the world that's sort of in the middle. It's the place where we go to that then where we get the insights that come out of the unknowable. They go into that imaginal space, they usually show up in some sort of archetypal form, personified form. And then we can communicate with them there and then bring those insights into our everyday reality. And one way to think about the I Ching is it exists in the sort of archetypal, imaginal middle space. And that, something like the Tao, which is unnameable, unknowable, directly manifests itself to us in this middle imaginal space, so that then we can take those insights and bring those into our everyday lives. Okay? And so this has a lot to do with how we might prepare to do the I Ching before we throw the I Ching. We might prepare to do this, right? And we might prepare to do this by, like if you're a Western person, you prepare to go into this space usually by dreaming and remembering your dreams and writing your dreams down. For the I Ching, you want to get into a frame of mind that's conducive to contacting this sort of imaginal archetypal space. Okay? And so, as you might imagine, that could involve some form of meditation. It could involve some form of being in a situation where you can relax your mind, where your defenses against the unconscious are somewhat lowered. And that is indeed the case. Okay, here's another diagram. You can see this. So let me go back up here. So I want to talk about preparing for the I Ching. Okay. So again, preparing for the I Ching, we want to again remind ourselves about the three jewels of Taoism, which are compassion, moderation, and humility. And remember that compassion leads to courage, moderation to generosity, and humility leads to leadership. And again, unlike Buddhism and other religions, these are not explicitly sought after. Instead, it is thought that if one acts in a natural, unaffected way, these qualities will emerge. When we approach the I Ching, manifest these qualities will help our consultation. In other words, if we have these qualities according to the I Ching, we can more easily enter into that imaginal space. Okay? These will reduce down the defenses, our psychological defenses and barriers to communicating with that imaginal unconscious space. Therefore, developing these qualities or letting them emerge is an important preparatory work for using the I Ching. And so we have to say, well, how do we encourage these qualities in ourselves? If you're Confucius, Confucian, you have the Confucian methods of doing those. We talked about some of those things, doing good for others and thinking good thoughts and, tide floats all boats, all those kind of things, having a harmonious society. And in at least Ming's form of Taoism, Confucianism is just seen as a human application of these Taoist principles, applying these principles to the human world. And if you live in that sort of, if you live according to those principles, then you have more easy facility to enter into conversation with what emerges from the Tao, like the I Ching. Okay? Other things that you could do. Other things you can do, you might imagine. Meditation. Okay, meditation. And of course, as I mentioned in the beginning of the course, that most of these Asian traditions that we're talking about have some form of meditation, and Taoism is no different. There are actually many forms of meditation in Taoism, but one of the simplest, easiest one, again, that comes out of this idea of the Tao of Tao is this idea of so'ong meditation. And this literally translates to something like sitting and forgetting. So you sit and you let go. Let go of your preconceptions, let go of everything that you can let go. It's a form of non-conceptual meditation. It's very similar to Zen meditation. Okay? The only difference is that Zen, being a Buddhist system, there is sort of under whatever layers underlying the meditation techniques is this idea of the centrality of the mind, the human mind. The idea that our world is created by our minds is something that is implicit in Buddhism, which is not the same thing in Taoism. Okay? Taoists do not believe that the world is created by our human minds. In fact, that would ascribe humans a far more important position in the universe than what Taoists would believe is real. Because again, for Taoists, humans do not have a very big role. We're pretty minor players, if you will. But other than that, it's pretty similar. Ming used to tell me, people used to ask him, there are no real Taoist teachers around. You're not around. I live far away from you. There's no good Taoist teachers. What do I do to practice Taoism? And Ming would say very simply, get up in the morning, throw the I Ching, find a Zen center, go sit Zen, and practice Tai Chi. Simple. You want to be a Taoist. So Zen, close enough. Okay, good enough, we say in psychology, good enough. And again, the way you do the meditation is very similar. However, things are more, there are not as many rules, formality to so on. There are no time rules, though what Ming would do with his students would be that if they really wanted to, what he would call taste the fruit of the practice, of this meditation practice, he would make his students do 50 minutes a day, 50 minutes a day for a year, just to start out with. And they would take basically a vow that they would do this every day for a year. 50 minutes a year they would do this so on. But it's not, that was just his rule. I mean, that was just for his students that he thought was helpful. It's not a hard and fast rule. Okay? This is a form of Wu Wei, Tao of Tao, action through non-action. And so again, the idea here is just to not force anything. Okay, not force anything. And for the purposes of the I Ching, doing this a few minutes before you throw the I Ching can clarify your intent and make for a more satisfying consultation. It can remove sort of somewhat of those barriers to entering into the imaginal space, the imaginal middle space, and make for a better consultation. So this is something that you would do if you could do if you're practicing the I Ching. You could do a few minutes of this to prepare you for your consultation. Yes?
Yeah, sorry if I didn't hear you say it. What do you mean by throwing the I Ching?
We're going to talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, throwing the I Ching. Usually there's some sort of involvement with doing things with your hands with the I Ching. We're going to talk about that. By the way, this kind of meditation, this action without action, doesn't have to be practiced sitting down, for the purposes of, preparing for the I Ching. You can do martial arts, you can do standing meditation, you can do your so long. Instead of standing, you would just you could just stand and do, and of course there's lots of Taoist teachers who will teach this. There's lots of different forms of meditation, standing, sitting. You could do Tai Chi practice, some kind of Qigong practice. Any of these things that would sort of, relax all the normal defenses you have would be good things to help prepare you for doing the I Ching. Reading through the I Ching and just sitting with the I Ching itself can also be just fine. You don't necessarily have to throw the coins. You can actually, some people have their daily practice. Ming would talk about people would just get up in the morning and they would just open the I Ching to a random page, read through whatever was there, and just keep mindful of that throughout the day. Now, it would be another sort of daily practice that you can do that would facilitate when you want to actually seriously throw the I Ching and ask it a question or something like that. Okay? So lots of different methods here. Okay, that's right. This slide's a little out of order. All right, so let's talk about methods for consulting the I Ching. There are two main methods. There are a lot more, and there are a lot of different types of methods within these, but there are two main categories. The first is the traditional one of using yarrow stalks. And yarrow is a plant that grows, you've seen yarrow flowers maybe, and it has a very straight stem. And so you can take these stems, you can cut them off, cut them into little lengths about like yay big, I don't know, 5-6 inches. And then you can use this yarrow stalk method. And what you would do here is you have groups of them you are picking these up and dividing them and subdividing them to get each line of the hexagram, right? So the idea here in these methods is you're going to build the hexagram. You build it from the bottom up, by the way, and you're going to find out ways that you're going to get either a solid line or a broken line. You're going to get yin or yang for each line. And so you can do that with the Yarrow stocks, and you can read, I got the instructions here for you, if you want to do the Yarrow stock method, which is a lot more complicated and also has the effect, if you do this method, of also having its own sort of meditational quality to it. Because it takes longer, you've got to sort of focus in, you've got to like sort of, you know, be in a meditational space to do this. This is also, some people like this method because you know, you don't need to do so long or something beforehand. You can just get into that space by just dividing the sticks and focusing in on that. Some people like it for that reason. Okay, but it's complicated. You can read through this. There's a wonderful YouTube video of a guy on YouTube showing you how to do this method, and so I will refer you to this. It's very good. He does a really good job showing you how to do it, and you can do this. But basically, you have 50 sticks, and you're going to have a little kind of ritualistic way where you have it in front of you. You divide it into 2 piles. You set down the pile in your right hand. You take one stock from the right hand pile and play it between the fourth and little fingers of your left hand. While holding the left hand pile in your hand, you count the left pile by 4s, setting the 4s in a pile separate from the right hand. When you have fewer more left in the original pile, you tuck them between the third and fourth fingers of your hand, and then you know, on and on and on and on. So it's this complicated, some people call it a hand dance meditation. Okay. Once you do it a couple times, it's pretty easy. And there are some shortcut ways to do it to make it a little simpler, but it is very complicated. Okay? For that reason, most people don't use the Yarrow stock method. Okay? Most people do not like the Yarrow stocks because it's too complicated. And so, luckily for us, instead, most people use the coin method. The coin method is very easy. Very, very easy. So what you're going to do with the coin method is you're going to formulate your question for the I Ching. Formulating the question is very important because you don't want to ask the I Ching a yes or no question. Okay, that's sort of not good. What you want to do instead is formulate a question, intent, the question with intent, you know, the question, you know, what's going on in your life. It's almost as if you would go to a friend and say, I've got this thing going on in my life right now. What do you think? Okay, so it's not, the I Ching is not fortune telling. It's not predicting the future. What the I Ching is more like is like consulting a impartial third party friend for advice around a certain situation or a certain question that you may have in your life. Okay? That's a very important distinction to make. Okay, very important distinction. It's not fortune telling. Because some people say, oh, it's fortune telling, you know, you're consulting, you're consorting with the devil by doing this. No. What you're really doing here, from a Western standpoint, is this is your gateway entering into this imaginal middle space and getting a perspective from that sort of imaginal middle space, that collective unconscious, if you really want to be Jungian about it, and then bringing that into your world, into a specific problem in your world. It's very similar in my mind to how Jungians look at dreams, right? You have a dream, and in your dream, you know, you are encountering an archetype, and that archetype has a perspective which can help you with whatever's going on in your daily conscious life. Very similar here. You're entering in that imaginal space with I Ching. You are then, you know, taking that back out, looking at the perspective, and applying it to your regular conscious life. Okay? So the easiest way is coins. You can use these Chinese coins here. Kind of if you can see those, but there's sort of like one side has less on it and one side has more on it. You can decide essentially, if you have the Chinese coins, what side you want to be yang and what side you want to be yin. I personally think the side with less stuff on it, to me, looks more bright, open, and airy, so I consider those, when I do it, I use those as the yang. And I use the ones with lots of writing on that looks like tails to me, so that goes tails, but you see here they've done the opposite. maybe the stuff with lots of stuff on it be yang, and the one with less to be yin. That's fine. Whatever you decide, as long as you're consistent, it's fine. Now, we're in the West, so we don't necessarily have Chinese coins. You can, by the way, buy these very cheaply. When I did the workshop, I bought a couple bags of them and just hand them out to people. They're very cheap. But if you don't have these, any coins will suffice. The lower the denomination of the coin, the better. This is something I learned from Ming, that again, part of Taoism is humility, and you don't try to get golden coins and do this and show off people. You want to use the most humble coin that you can use. And so for us Westerners, for Americans, the best coin for doing the I Ching is the penny, right? And again, if you have pennies, then I typically say tails to me is yin, because it's more stuff there, it's darker, and the heads is more yang. That's the way I look at it. But you can do exactly the opposite if that's how you feel about the coins. It's up to you. You can make the decision about that, okay? As long as you're consistent. Once you do it that way, you do it that way consistently, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to throw the coins, and you're going to throw them 6 times. You're going to build the hexagram from the bottom up. So you throw the coins, put in your hand, make the intent of the question, okay? Throw the coins, and they lie. Say, for instance, they come out with 3 of these things, 3 heads. I would call this yang, right? And you do another one, and maybe you get 3 tails. That's yin. And then maybe you get 2 tails and one head. Then that's going to be yin, mostly yin. So we count that one as yin, as a broken line. But this one is interesting, right? So we say we throw 3 yin coins, we get yin, but it's so extreme yin that we put a dot next to it, because that dot means this is a changing line. Okay, that means it's going to change into something else. Okay, and we go on and on and up in it. So let's say we do this. And we do this thing here, and we have 2 changing lines. What's going to happen is we're going to actually look at two hexagrams. First one, which is the situation right now, and the second one, which is roughly where the situation is sort of progressing to. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to take this hexagram, we're going to change these lines. We'll change this one from yin to yang, and this one from yang to yin. We'll make another hexagram here, and then we're going to interpret both of these things. If we don't have any changing lines, then we just look at the one. Okay, that makes sense? But if we have changing lines, then we're going to look at 2. One is the now, and one is the what's becoming. Okay, does it make sense? So it's a very simple way to do it. Then what we're going to do is, when we have the numbers of the hexagrams, we're going to open up our favorite copy of the I Ching, whatever that might be, and there are hundreds, literally hundreds of different copies of the I Ching out there. Many different translations. I always recommend to have more than one, because sometimes one will speak to you more than another, and you can read through ones and see which ones speak to you. The one that has kind of become the de facto standard for Westerners is the Wilhelm one. It's usually the gray cover, and that's the one that has Jung's introduction, which I think you guys are reading for your test, right? Introduction to I Ching by Jung. Can I put that up there on the readings? I think so. Yeah? The Tao Te Ching, that's for your paper. So I think in your reading assignments you have the forward from Jung's I Ching. I can't remember if it's up there or not. Anyway, that's the one that Westerners kind of been around, one of the earlier translations. It's pretty good. I will tell you though that many of the translations of the I Ching were done at a time, they were done by Confucius. And so what they did is the Confucians added in sort of Confucian morality to the I Ching. Okay, so a lot of the translations come from these Confucius, sort of through the lens of Confucianism, the I Ching through the lens of Confucianism. And those are perfectly fine. The Wilhelm is one of those, perfectly fine. But you will find a little bit of more moralizing in those translations, right? Then there are some translations like this one, for instance, and also the one that Ming published after it was published posthumously. He finished it right before he died. That have gone back to earlier versions of the I Ching before the Confucians got in there and added things. And you can find a couple translations like that, and those give a little different flavor. It doesn't have so much of the Confucian morality in them. So you get a little bit different flavor. So I recommend trying different ones out and finding ones that may, that you feel some resonance with. I have probably 20 different ones, and I have ones I really like, and I have ones that I just don't really relate to at all. My friend who does this all the time, who I did the workshop with, Lauren, she has a version she really loves, and it doesn't do much for me. She doesn't like the ones that I have too much. So everybody has a different sort of take on things. Okay, so you experiment, try to find the one you like. You get your hexagrams, you open this up to the page, and then you can start, you just read the description. We can do that maybe a little bit. Okay. All right. So, does anybody want to try? Try? Well, we can have more than one person try. Both of you guys want to do it? All right, we need pennies. I have no pennies. Anybody have pennies? 3 pennies? I mean, you can lose nickels. But you got what?
I don't know.
You got a bunch? All right, give him 3. If you got 6 there. All right. And look, in a pinch, you can use dimes or quarters or nickels. It doesn't really matter. But, traditionally, if you use low denomination things. Okay, so we're going to, let's just sit for a second. So sit down, relax. Just sit. Why don't we close our eyes? We'll just do a little tiny 30 seconds of so wong. So wong is sitting and forgetting. That means you just close your eyes and you do nothing. You let everything go. You don't count your breaths. You don't have to do anything. You just sit and just empty your mind. Just forget everything. Okay, sitting and forgetting. Literally sitting and forgetting. So just try that for a minute. Okay, so I'll try that. Okay, now formulate a question in your mind. Okay, hold that question in your mind. Formulate it, just hold it in your mind. Take your coins, put them in your hands, however you want to do it. Shake them up. And then I know you guys don't want to throw them on the floor, but you just put them on your, so you shake them up, keep the question in your mind, put them on the thing. Okay, oh, you need a paper and something to write with, by the way. You've done that first. Oops. Somebody give him a piece of paper. Give him a piece of paper.
Oh, yeah. You okay?
I should.
You want mine?
Yeah, just take hers. Take hers. All right. All right. So now, all right. So what did you get now? Which one you guys?
What order do we read?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just what do you get? What are they?
Oh, two tails and a head.
2 tails in. We're going to call that yin. You'll do my method.
Okay.
Yin. So you're going to start in the bottom. And you're going to write a broken line. Okay.
Same thing.
Same thing. Broken line. Okay. All right. Now hold the question in your mind again. Do it again. What'd you get?
Opposite. 2 heads and a tail.
Okay. So now you're going to have a
Solid line.
solid line.
Same thing.
Solid line. Oh, it's the same one. And we'll see. Who knows what happens with this. Okay. Again, hold the question in your mind. Okay.
2 tails, heads.
Okay. So broken line.
All tails.
All tails. So now you have a broken line and put a dot next to it. That's going to be a changing line. Okay, again, hold the question.
Two heads and a tail.
2 heads and tail. That is a solid line. Yawn. What'd you get?
Same thing.
Solid line. Okay. Let's do it again.
heads and a tail.
Two heads and tail. Okay, so that's going to be a solid line.
2 tails and a head.
That's going to be a broken line. Okay, now the last one, right? Number 6.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
6.
All right, go ahead and do this one.
Two heads and a tail.
Two heads and tail. That's going to be a solid line. And you?
Same thing.
Same thing. Okay. All right. Now, we go back to this. Okay. So let's start with yours first. So what are the bottom 3?
Broken, solid, broken.
Okay, broken, solid, broken. So we're going to go here. We're going to look for broken. Broken.
Zen. Con.
Solid
Oh,
broken.
Wait a
con.
minute.
Con.
Con.
Two.
Broken, solid, broken. Okay.
Right.
Con. What's the second one?
Solid. Oh,
Top 3.
all solids. So
All
tien.
solid. So
So
con.
tien.
So you're number 6. That look right? Broken,
Yeah.
solid, broken, solid, solid, solid.
That's right.
All right. So write down number 6. Okay. And did you didn't have any changing lines?
No.
Okay. So you're 6. All right. What's yours now?
It's broken, solid, broken.
Broken, solid, broken. That's
So the
con.
third one's changing.
All right. We'll hold on to the changing one. So you have con. What's the second 3?
Solid, broken, solid.
Solid, broken, solid. Where is that one? You
Luo.
guys have better eyes than me. Solid,
It's
In the middle of the top.
Luo.
solid, broken, solid. Lou. So you got 64, right? So broken, solid, broken, solid, broken, solid.
Yep.
Right? All right, 64. Okay. Now which one changes?
Is the top of the first one is the broken one?
Okay, so the first one's going to be broken, solid, solid.
It's the broken, solid, broken, and the top broken is the changing.
Okay, so it's going to be broken, solid, solid, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be shoe, and then you have the same top.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's going to be number 50, right? So broken, solid, 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 broken, solid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to go to number 50. So you write down the first one, 64, and then 50 next to each other, okay? So let's start with yours first because it's simpler. So you have number 6, right? So I'll read this to you and you can tell me if this relates to your situation at all, okay? So 6 is going to be called grievance. And here is again, this is the pre-Confucian stuff here. Grievance. Allegiance is blocked and becomes cautious. To stop halfway is auspicious. To carry on to the end is not. One should go see a big man. One should not cross a big river. Because he has not been granted advancement, a subject's faith in his ruler is impaired and he feels a grievance. Rather than let this continue, he should go and have the matter out, go see the big man. He should not attempt any great undertaking, cross a big river. Okay? So that is yours. I'm trying to see if there's anything else in here. Okay, and you can look at the structure of this thing, of the hexagram. Subject is difficulties in the lower trigram. His path ahead is blocked by the strong ruler in the upper trigram. He therefore lays his difficulties before the ruler in a grievance. Okay, that make any sense to you?
Yeah.
You want to share your question?
I'm Latino, and we just elected a guy who had a lot of vocal,
Yeah.
a lot of stuff to say. So I was
Yeah.
concerned. I had some concern. The paper I picked up actually is I walked by a professor's office. She had this envelope full of positive thoughts, and so I picked that up and like, oh yeah, that's where I got
Yeah.
this, and like started thinking about that and like,
Well, it's very interesting. You know, I mean, we're getting a lot of this now, like in the dream work stuff I've been doing, people having dreams about the election, and you know, the unconscious been shaken up by this, right? And so it has lots to say about this stuff. But I mean, just listen to this, the second line of this. Allegiance is blocked and becomes cautious. So if you think about you being an American citizen, you know, or living in America, you know, the allegiance to America, it's blocked and becomes cautious, right? So it's pretty accurate. Right? Seeing a lot of this now. I bet a lot of you guys are having dreams related to the election. Very common. I went to a dream group the other week, and everybody had a dream that was related to the election. It was really amazing. All right, good. And this, if you had the other version, the one like the Wilhelm version, it would have more to say. You know, it'd say the wise man does this, and you know, it has a little more moral stuff. You know, the good man does this, the sage does this, the lowly man does this, right? Not so much in this book because it's pre-Confucius stuff, right? Yes.
Is that Ming's translation?
No, this is not Ming's translation. I left that at home. But this is a good one too. It's very similar. This is a guy named Greg Wincup. W-H-I-N-C-U-P. All right. Let's talk about yours.
Number
64.
64.
Start with 64.
Wasn't it 50?
64. And then it goes in, then it changes into 50. Yeah. Where is it here? Where is that? 64. Okay, 64 is not yet across. I'll read it to you. Not yet across, blessed, unfavorable for the little fox. He gets his tails wet. He gets his tails wet just before he reaches the shore. One is in midstream on a dangerous ford. Success is certain for all, but someone small and weak who will drown before reaching the shore. This little fox gets his showy tail wet and it drags him under. Fording a river symbolizes any uncertain or dangerous sequence of events. Structure is, he is in the midst of difficulties, the lower trigram, but allegiance to a shining ruler will get him through the upper trigram. Could be about the election too, I don't know. All right, so that's the current situation, okay? And then it changes to 50.
Yeah.
50. Dung, the ritual cauldron. The ritual cauldron, supremely auspicious, blessed. The ding is a heavy 3- or 4-legged cauldron, usually made of gleaming bronze, in which sacrificial meats were cooked and offered to the spirits. Since it was used in state sacrifices, the ding is a symbol of the state and the power of the king. The hexagram as a whole deals with the establishment of a new ruling regime. Structure. Subjects below kneel in submission to a shining ruler above. The lines of the hexagram form the image of the ding. 2 halves of the lower are the feet. The 3 solid lines above are the ding's body, and the 2 halves of the 5th line are the handles, and the solid line at the top is the carrying rod. In this last hexagram, in this new one, a new regime is established. The 2 are the climax of the entire sequence of hexagrams. The change's protagonist finally reaches the pinnacle of power. The hexagrams that follow deal with the subject's responses to their new ruler. Okay, you want to share? You don't have to.
I asked how I should further like my spirituality.
Okay, so danger's crossing, in the midst of danger, but if you persevere, then good things are going to come, and you're going to be kneel to a new ruler. That might suggest having a spiritual teacher. Does that make sense? Does it feel accurate?
Yeah.
If it doesn't, you can say so. It's fine. Sometimes it doesn't. Okay, good. You guys get an idea then? So it's like this giving you a different perspective on what's happening. Okay? A different perspective on what's happening. Yes?
It changes because you got the solid and then the circle.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. No, you got all solid or all broken. Right? That means that the yin or the yang is extreme. So when it becomes that extreme, then it changes. Just like the yin-yang sign, right? Just like the Tai Chi sign. Okay. Any other questions? And unlike a lot of stuff in class, which I tell you don't try at home, this you could actually try on your own if you want. Plenty of copies, pretty easy to do. Now you know how to do it. It's not really difficult. So, I find it's a very good tool. I will use it when I come to some kind of, when I have perplexing situation in my life, I will oftentimes use the I Ching for this. All right. So I want to stop in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about what Taoism has to do with psychology. I think I talked about this last time a little bit. I can't remember, but I'll go over it again. It's worth reiterating. Taoism is discrete. It is not secret. It doesn't hide away, but it doesn't go out and seek students or proclaim any kind of movement. In other words, it's not trying to proselytize. It doesn't try to convert people. Okay? You can't learn the totality of Taoism in a weekend seminar. You can learn Taoist practices, things like the I Ching, Tai Chi, martial arts, etc. You can learn those in, I don't want to say a short amount of time, but you can get a taste of these things. Again, remember the buffet analogy? You can step up to the buffet and taste some things, right? But you're not going to really figure out what it is that you want to do, figure out all your appetites just from doing the weekend seminars. Okay? In the Western worlds, and again, a lot of the Western psychology, we tend to mistake our psychological discomfort with a spiritual motive or need. That could relate to your thing too. I don't know. Okay, you have a psychological need. Maybe it comes from your developmental history as a child or whatever. You didn't get enough something from your parents, and we tend to mistake that for a spiritual need because we're Westerners. We're confused about this. Hardships we have because of early family history, lack of community, lack of religion, create an elusive yet pressing appetite for something. Okay, this is like the example I think I was giving you before, where you just go to the buffet and people are just telling you, oh, you really got to have the chicken and the rice. That's all you can eat, right? That's the only thing you have. So you eat that all the time, but you really have an appetite for something else. You just don't realize it yet. Okay. That's not a good motivation. The fact that you're sick of the chicken and rice is not a good motivation to start eating other things. That's not necessarily testing your true appetite, right? And so Taoism really can't help with this. Okay? It's really inappropriate to use Taoism to help with these sort of things. At least this was Ming's big thing. He talked about this all the time. That you have to sort of let go of a lot of that stuff and be able to really go and try to experience what you have an appetite for without the sort of motivational factors coming from all these psychological issues that we have. Okay? Easy to say, hard to do. Right? Americans pay a high price for our freedom. We tend to live in a culture where individualism is deified. We really value our independence over almost everything, our independence and freedom, but this leaves us quite lonely and isolated as people. And the psychological issues that arise from this awkward personal freedom, again, are not something that can be fixed by Taoism. Okay? That said, the Taoist practices can make you more aware. Oh, our guest speaker is here. Oh, it's not working. Hi, Julie. Are you?
I can't believe I'm actually lost.
Okay. Okay. I'll come out to the street and help you. The main drag that you drove in on. Yeah. Do you know where the library is? Do you know where the library is? All right, get near the library and I'll come and find you. Just in front. Okay. I see you in a bite. All right. I knew that was going to happen. What's that?
Should we all go get it?
No.
Class
excursion.
All right, so let me finish this thing first here. So Taoist practices may make you more aware of the loneliness and isolation that we have because of this sort of addiction to our feeling of independence and as individuals. That may really bother some people. Some people may freak out, if they start practicing these things. This is also true, by the way, of Buddhism and other things. So you need to be aware of this again. And again, this is why Taoism and Buddhism are not necessarily, well, Buddhism we could argue about, but Taoism is not a substitute for psychotherapy. Okay? Do your psychotherapy, get all your developmental issues together, and then you can really kind of step up to the buffet and, have a good appetite about things. Okay? You can't go far into Taoism with mistaken motives, according to Ming. He was very adamant about this. And And he also is adamant that charismatic spiritual leaders will try to take advantage of your loneliness and isolation and your psychological issues to try to create a community around their teachings. This is called brainwashing. This is called cult building. I don't know, I watched the other night this movie about Scientology. No offense to the Scientologists, but it was pretty scary. Because people will manipulate you and use this hunger, this spiritual hunger, for their own ends. Right? And it's going to be really quite powerful. But ultimately, even belonging to a cult won't just give you some temporary respite from these feelings, but won't ultimately be satisfying. Okay. All right. And the other thing to be careful of is when we study things like Taoism, a lot of times we will overlay our Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Western monotheistic value system over what we're doing. For Buddhism, this can kind of work because eventually Buddhism is a little bit about the individual, and then you can sort of abandon that sort of at the end. Not great, but it fits a little better with Buddhism. It doesn't fit with Taoism at all. And so this is another thing that you have a real hard time with Taoism doing, because there's always this idea that we're going to have transcendence or we're going to have salvation at the end. If you're doing the Tao of Day, you can do this. But you also have to realize at some point, when you actually, through that, encounter the Tao, to let go of all the stuff that got you there. So this is really hard for some people. Okay? And again, we talked about the appetite. I gave you my metaphor of the buffet. Put a picture of the buffet here. I'm getting hungry now looking at that. I think that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, again, mental health, psychology, not a focus of Taoism. But I will say that Taoist-related practices, such as traditional Chinese medicine, can help with mental problems, with psychological illness. And maybe we can get Julie to talk a little bit about that. Okay. So the last thing I want to tell you is being a Taoist in 5 easy steps. You decide you want to be a Taoist, here's what you need to do. You don't really have any good Taoist teachers around, so this is what you do. Practice Tai Chi or other some movement art related to Taoism. Sit, do Zen meditation, but while you're doing it, forget the rules. In other words, then you'll be doing so long. Read the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, which you guys are reading. Consult the I Ching when you feel like it. Do everything at 70%, not 100%, because we're such heroic. We want to go out there and we want to win. I go to the exercise class and the teachers tell me, go 110%. That's anti-Taoism. Taoism is going 70%. Always saving a little in reserve. Okay. And 6 is to seek balance with the environment, with nature. Okay. Go out in nature and see the balance in nature and try to emulate that. Optional things, you can practice the so-called mantic arts, feng shui, astrology, other kinds of more esoteric conceptual meditations. You can practice medicine, cooking, calligraphy, painting, tea ceremony, etc., 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 etc. These things have some flavor of the original Taoist practices. And so the idea, again, is to get an appreciation for a simple, uncomplicated life that moves closer to the natural balance that is really the Tao that's everywhere. And that's what I have to say to you. Any questions on this?